You are about to hear 3 stories. Each is inspired by both stories we've learned about on this trip and the experiences of people we know. Each story illustrates a realistic way in which the universal human right of autonomy, the ability to govern oneself, is infringed upon. As you listen to these stories, try to imagine how you would feel if your autonomy was restricted in these ways. Our first story takes place in Portugal.
I was born a slave. In the Portuguese island colony of Madeira, if your parents were slaves, you were born into bondage. At the age of 18, working in the sugar plantations, I was, like so many female slaves, unwillingly impregnated by my master, and I gave birth to a baby girl. I worked as a slave in the sugar plantations until I was 20 years old. After slavery was outlawed in Portugal, I was set free. At that time, I had a 1-year-old daughter, and I needed to find a way to take care of her. Because her father was my previous master, he had no legal responsibility to take care of the child, so I was forced to support both her and myself on my own. Although I had been set free, I now had no place to live and no way to support myself and my daughter. I finally found work as a domestic servant in a wealthy family's house, where I was responsible for cooking, cleaning, washing clothes, and fetching water. As time went on, though, my daughter and I remained in deep poverty. We experienced significant social marginalization from the predominantly white Portuguese people around us. The father of the family I was working for soon singled me out from the other servants working there. He began to make advances towards me. When he first told me he wanted to sleep with me, I wanted to say no, but I knew I would get kicked out of the house if I did. So I accepted. It soon became routine. After a while, his wife found out about it, and I ended up getting fired anyways. One night, walking home late from begging on the streets, I saw some sex workers. They called out to me, and when I went over, they told me of the job they worked and the wages they earned. It was much more than I was ever paid as a domestic servant. My rent was due soon, and I knew my daughter and I would be turned out of our apartment if we were unable to pay it. I took the job. I was forced to spend every night working on the streets to make ends meet. There was danger involved in this work, and I always had to be careful and on my guard as to who I was working with. My life could depend on my street smarts. Although sex work is not the job I would have wanted for myself, due to poverty resulting from discrimination and exploitation, it was the only option available to me if I wanted to keep food on the table every night and a roof over my head.
We will now hear from a woman in Northern Ireland.
I was born and raised in an Irish Catholic neighborhood in Belfast. I grew up witnessing the violence, grief, and trauma that resulted from the conflict between Irish Republicans and British Loyalists. In 1987, my brother lost his wife in the bombing of a fishmonger, and we lost our parents in the bombing of a pub a few months later. I was 18. I knew I wanted to do something to help people who had suffered like me because of the conflict, so I began to pursue a degree in applied social studies at Ulster University in hopes of becoming a social worker. However, the trajectory of my life changed in 1989, when my brother was arrested for being suspected of involvement with the Irish Republican Army. After his arrest, he asked me to look after his young son. We had no other relatives who could care for him, and neither of us trusted the foster care system. I loved my studies, and I still really wanted to become a social worker. However, I would not have the time or money to continue if I took in my nephew. At the end of the day, I felt as though I didn't really have a choice. I dropped out of school and began to look after my nephew. My first priority was finding employment so that I could support the two of us. I hadn't finished my degree, so there weren't many options, but I eventually found a job as a house cleaner. The hours were long, and I didn't make much money, but it was just enough to support my nephew and I. I was thankful for the employment. Early one morning, as I was on my way to work, a police officer approached me and asked me to stop. I would have continued on my way. I didn't want to jeopardize my job. But according to the law, police officers could subject anyone to questioning and a search. If I didn't comply, I might have been arrested, and then there would be no one to care for my nephew. So I stopped. He asked my name, my address, where I was coming from, and many other questions. I began to grow nervous. I was going to be late. If the officer noticed my nerves, he made no indication. He told me to hand over my bag and subjected me to a search. By the time he finished and sent me on my way, I was already 5 minutes behind schedule. I ran, but it took another 10 minutes to get to my employer's house. I tried to explain the situation to her, but she wouldn't hear it. She remarked that tardiness was a sign that I didn't truly appreciate my job, and she fired me.
Our final story is about a student at BYU.
As a student at BYU, I've enjoyed having multiple jobs in the field of athletic administration. Although athletics is a predominantly black field, the administration side tends to have white employees, mostly men. As a black woman, I defy both these norms. Working from the bottom up, I've accomplished some great things, including working at Big 12 headquarters in Texas. But I've had to work twice as hard as my colleagues to achieve these goals because I am a black woman. There is ignorance and stigma around what black people can do and what careers they can go into. Consequently, people often assume I'm a DEI hire. They overlook all my hard work and qualifications. I've faced discrimination on numerous levels. For example, one summer I was in a leadership position for BYU sports camps. My counterpart was male and white. I had much more experience than him and put in more work behind the scenes. However, the employees we oversaw asked me significantly less questions than him. If I did get questions, people would check my answer with him before proceeding any further. Subconscious biases undermined my efforts to fulfill my role as a leader. There are no laws that have directly inhibited me from achieving my career goals. However, because of perpetuating biases, whether subconscious or not, I have had a much more difficult path in achieving my career goals than my white colleagues.
As much as autonomy sounds like a personal responsibility, it is largely influenced by external factors. An individual must be legally allowed to exercise their autonomy as well as have the capacity to fulfill it. This capacity may be affected by things such as subconscious beliefs and economic hardship. Learning to recognize these external factors is essential to social change.